In the beginning of the story, the female lead is doing her cleaning job. She thinks to herself that she just came for a part-time job. However, when she looks around, she gets scared and wonders if the people around her are gangsters and what kind of company this is, as it is named Thirsty Deer. She is puzzled because Thirsty Deer does not sound like a tattoo company. She sighs and wonders if she should be worried about her job, such as cleaning. Suddenly, a man yells in frustration about being a gambler, which makes her even more frightened. The leader, who's also the male lead, orders his men to unleash the kids and catch them before their brother finds out. He warns them that if they don't succeed, they're all dead. One of the men responds affirmatively, calling him brother, and they all leave the building. Just then, the female lead notices a man holding a garden watering can. She wonders if anyone else is left. Suddenly, the man's leg twists, causing him to accidentally pour all the water from the can onto the male lead. The man screams out in concern, asking if the male lead is okay. The female lead becomes worried and wonders what she should do about the situation. The man, addressing the male lead as brother, exclaims that he has committed a mortal sin. The male lead doesn't respond. The female lead observes the male lead and thinks that he must exercise, noting his broad shoulders and height of over 190 centimeters. She also finds him handsome. The man hands the male lead a towel and asks him to wipe himself off. The male lead removes his wet shirt, revealing a large tattoo on his back. The female lead, noticing the tattoos, the title brother, his grim look, and his scars, becomes anxious, thinking he might be the gang violence boss she's heard about. Terrified, she starts cleaning quickly and decides that she will ask the dispatch company to send her somewhere else. While she was mopping the floors, the handle of the mop accidentally hit the male lead. She turned around, confused, and realized that he was the gang leader who did not look well. She was startled and wondered why the gang boss was standing behind her. The gang leader, trembling, pointed his finger at her. She initially thought he was referring to her mop, but soon realized he was talking about her. Feeling a chill, she understood that the unsettling feeling she had earlier was caused by a person. Anxiously, she tried to reassure herself, saying it was okay. Suddenly, another man noticed the boss's condition and shouted, "Brother." This made her feel certain that she was in serious trouble. Other members rushed to the boss and asked him what had happened and why he couldn't speak. They were concerned, asking if someone had hurt his ribs. An enraged man grabbed a garden shovel and angrily demanded to know who had the audacity to hurt their brother, suggesting they should bury the culprit in the mountain behind them. Another man threatened to kill the person first with a knife. The female lead, witnessing all of this, became increasingly fearful and started to run away. The boss noticed her trying to stop her, but she was too scared and kept running. The female lead, Go Eunha, who was 27 years old, thought about how she had just laid down a man she met for the first time while working her part-time job. At her workplace, the dressing room of the Young 2 production company, Eunha explained the earlier situation to her best friend, Gumiho, who was doing Eunha's hair. Gumiho, who was the same age as Eunha and an apprentice hair designer, asked how Eunha knew the man was a gangster, questioning if it was written on his forehead. Eunha replied that she could just feel it when she saw him and believed that Gumiho would have the same reaction upon seeing him. Gumiho, with enthusiasm, asked what the man looked like. Eunha described him as being over 190 centimeters tall with shoulders like an American football player. She said his eyes looked completely torn out, his face had knife marks, and he gave a brutal impression. Gumiho expressed a desire to see him too, mentioning that tall, well-built men were her type and that a bad guy had a special charm. Eunha became angry and yelled, asking if Gumiho was crazy, insisting that he wasn't just a bad man but a criminal and a social evil. Gumiho laughed and remarked that if he were a gangster from long ago, would he feel that much shame? Gumiho reminded Eunha that after their high school college entrance exams, when everyone went to see the movie Crime City, Eunha was the only one who missed it. Eunha explained that when she was young, she encountered a gangster and almost died. Gumiho, somewhat skeptical, remarked that no matter how much of a gangster he was, he couldn't have done anything to a child. Eunha insisted she was serious. Gumiho then posed a hypothetical question. What if the boss had fallen in love with Eunha at first sight, saying she was the first person to break his ribs? This thought made Eunha scared. Eunha defended her stance, insisting that there was no man in the world like a gangster boss. Gumiho teased her, suggesting that Eunha should also meet a guy. She questioned why a 27-year-old was still single. Eunha mentioned Hyunwoo Appa, asserting that she had him in her life. Gumiho, somewhat skeptical, asked if Hyunwoo Appa was a real person, to which Eunha affirmed with a blush that he was. Eunha then expressed a hope that they could meet again soon. Gumiho hugged her affectionately, agreeing and wishing her a good time filming that day. Eunha thanked her and expressed her gratitude. Eunha stood in front of the camera and addressed her audience enthusiastically, asking how everyone was doing and introducing herself as Minnie's sister. She explained that they would be playing with clay that day and invited them to join in. Continuing, she revealed that her main job was as a kids' channel creator. Minnie and Friends was specifically a play channel for children. Despite making good money from being a young YouTuber, she explained that she took on a part-time cleaning job because she was still relatively unknown and the company was facing financial losses on salaries. As Yuna proudly presented her clay creation of Admiral Yi's son Sin, the crew members looked disappointed. However, she remained confident and asked them if they thought it was cool, oblivious to their reaction, and started playing with her clay creation. After the cameraman whispered to her that they needed to finish soon, Yunha reacted with surprise internally, realizing she had lost track of time again. She ended the video with a smile, asking viewers to subscribe and like before signing off with a farewell message. Later, in the dressing room, Yunha expressed relief that she had successfully finished filming for the day. She noticed that the clay toys she had made earlier had become too soft. Suddenly, she remembered the gang boss from earlier and wondered if he would be all right, recalling that he had looked quite ill. She pondered whether she should have offered to pay for his treatment. Scared and berating herself, Yunha thought about the situation. She criticized herself, wondering if she was foolish enough to risk being buried in the mountain behind trying to pay for someone else's treatment. She expressed fear that if they came after her for no reason, she should stay quiet. She hoped that the gang boss hadn't been hurt too severely. At the hospital, Boss Juwon lay in bed while his gang members wept around him. Jo Il-young, Juwon's secretary and right-hand man, expressed anger and concern, questioning how Juwon had ended up in this state. He suspected the Miao gang's involvement and demanded to know if there were more of them out there, declaring it as a declaration of war. Juwon struggled to sit up, and Il-young urgently asked if he was okay, expressing their surprise and worry over his condition. He demanded to know who had attacked Juwon, assuming it was the Miao gang responsible for the assault. Xiu Jiawan, the boss of Thirsty Deer and regarded as their big brother, asked about Yunha, referring to her as that woman. Confused, the other members questioned if he meant a woman, given her role in cleaning. Jiawan clarified that he was referring to the small-sized woman who had been cleaning. The members expressed disbelief, wondering aloud if Yuna could be an assassin, though they doubted she could even kill a single cockroach. They blamed themselves for nearly harming their brother because of her actions. Determined to rectify the situation, they reassured Jiawan not to worry, promising to pursue Yunha relentlessly until they found her, even if it meant chasing her to the ends of hell. Il-young and the other gang members whispered among themselves about requesting a criminal investigation into the incident involving Yunha. They expressed uncertainty about how to find her since they didn't know her full name. They speculated that she might not be an ordinary person. Suddenly, Juwon interrupted them with a yell, demanding them to stop. He surprised them by revealing Yuna's name, Go Unha. Il-young questioned how Juwon knew her name. Juwon insisted that if they found her, they should bring her to him without harming her. The gang members were taken aback by Juwon's unusual order. Despite having nothing to fear in the world, instead of seeking revenge, Juwon instructed them to handle Yunha politely. They concluded that Yunha must be a formidable threat if their fearless boss chose not to retaliate and instead emphasized a cautious approach. At the hospital, when Juwon strolled outside his room, everyone was scared of him. He looked outside and saw children playing. One boy asked what they should do, and another suggested playing hide and seek, to which the first boy agreed. Juwon reflected on his childhood, remembering that hide and seek was a game he liked too. Just then, Il-young approached and called out to him. Juwon asked if the doctor had said he could be discharged. Il-young replied that the doctor hadn't given such approval, expressing concern about potential after-effects and urging Juwon to stay hospitalized longer. He then mentioned the woman, Yunha. Juwon immediately asked if they had found her. Il-young explained to Juwon that due to the Personal Information Protection Law, the Human Resources Dispatch Company wouldn't reveal any information about Yunha. They mentioned that the company would only cooperate if they filed a formal complaint with the police, and Il-young asked Juwon what they should do next. Juwon acknowledged the situation. Il-young then suggested that they had already reached out to the Criminal Investigation Office and assured Juwon that he would find her, asking Juwon to wait a little longer. As Juwon recalled how scared Yunha had been during their encounter, he sighed and told Il-young to stop the search efforts. Il-young, frustrated, questioned if Juwon was quitting the search, insisting that they needed to find out who was behind Yunha and show them their strength to prevent such incidents from happening again. As they were talking, a group of children ran by and one of them bumped into Juwon. Il-young angrily scolded the children for running dangerously down the hallway. Juwon, however, told him to leave the kids alone, saying they were just children. Kneeling down to the child, Juwon gently asked where he was going in such a hurry, expressing his curiosity. The scared child replied that he was going to see Sister Minnie. Hearing this, Juwon repeated the name Sister Minnie. Just then, the child's mother screamed his name, Sunwoo, in fear. The reflection of two people was visible in the mother's eyes. The child, crying, ran to his mother and hugged her, expressing his fear. The mother, scared for her child, yelled at Jawan, demanding to know what he planned to do to her child. She scolded her son, reminding him that she had told him not to talk to strangers. Il-yong, enraged, yelled back at the mother, asking what his brother had done wrong. Jawan intervened, telling Il-yong to stop, saying that it didn't matter. Il-yong apologized to Jawan for his outburst. Just then, Jawan noticed a paper pamphlet that advertised regular performances for children in the first-floor lobby by a performer named Sister May. Jawan decided to go to the lobby for a moment. Il-yong insisted on accompanying him, saying they should go together. As soon as Jawan descended to the lobby, he heard voices and looked around, finding Sister Minnie playing with the children. The kids cheered for her, exclaiming that she was the best. Jawan was stunned to see Yoonha and thought to himself, "I found you." Jawan tried to call out to her, saying, "Excuse me," but suddenly stopped, realizing that she might be scared again. He wondered what she would do when they met. Deciding to observe quietly, Jawan hid and listened to Yoonha. Yoonha approached a child in a wheelchair named Soo-yeon and greeted him excitedly, asking how he had been. Soo-yeon, equally excited, called out to her, "Sister Minnie." She asked if he had come to see her. He responded affirmatively. Yoonha hugged Soo-yeon with excitement, expressing how much she had missed him and asking if he had been listening to his mother and staying strong. She then revealed that she had brought a toy for him, which made Soo-yeon exclaim with joy, thanking her and calling her the best. Internally, Yoonha worried about Soo-yeon's condition, noting that he appeared thinner than before. Unable to hold back her emotions, she hugged him tightly. Later, Yoonha met with Soo-yeon's mother and asked about his condition. Soo-yeon's mother explained that she needed to mentally prepare herself because curing children's cancer required ion therapy. She added that there was no place in Korea that provided intermediate treatment yet, and to get treatment, they would have to go to Japan or Germany. She mentioned that even in nearby Japan, the cost would be about 100 million. This news left Yoonha shocked and worried. Soo-yeon's mother continued, explaining that they had already spent all their rent money and severance pay on treatment expenses and could no longer afford the necessary funds. Yoonha became teary-eyed, thinking about the immense sum of 100 million and wondering how she could possibly gather such an amount immediately. Yoonha left the place in tears, overwhelmed by the thought of needing to save money somehow, even though she could barely earn a salary. As she walked away, suddenly Jawan stood in front of her and tried to get her attention, but she was unaware of him and accidentally bumped into him. She wondered what she had bumped into, feeling something unfamiliar, and then looked up at his face. Realizing it was the gangster boss, she became anxious and confused about why he was there. Both of them felt nervous. Jawan apologized and, blushing while looking away, asked if he could have her hand. Yoonha, scared and startled by his request, quickly apologized in a panic. Jawan called out to her using her name, Miss Go-yeon, which startled Yoonha even more. She was frightened, wondering how he knew her name and considering if this was some aspect of the dark world she had heard about. Overwhelmed with emotion, she believed there was only one thing she could do. Yoonha knelt before Jawan, tears streaming down her face, and apologized sincerely. She expressed regret for hurting someone and then running away irresponsibly. She sobbed as she apologized, explaining that she had been terrified at the time and pleaded for him to stop. Jawan attempted to explain and console her, assuring her that it wasn't like that. He reached out his hand towards her, but Yoonha misunderstood his gesture and, still scared, yelled out a refusal, stating firmly that she would report any violence against her. Suddenly, some kids attacked Jawan, thinking he was bothering Yoonha. They hit him with their hands and called him a scoundrel, which surprised Jawan. The kids urged Yoonha to run away quickly, assuring her they would handle the situation. Yoonha became concerned for the safety of the kids, worrying if Jawan might retaliate against them. She quickly intervened, lifting all the kids and calling them to come with her. In a swift motion, she ran away from the scene. Jawan tried to stop her, calling out, "Wait," but Yoonha continued to run away, leaving him behind. Jawan sat contemplating the daunting sum of 100 million needed for Soo-yeon's treatment. He wondered how he could possibly acquire such a large amount. Meanwhile, his gang members were bewildered by Jawan's behavior. They knew he owned a company with annual sales exceeding 20 billion won and was immensely wealthy. One of them asked him what he was worrying about, expressing confusion. In response to a member whispering to Il-yong that the doctor had declared Jawan fully recovered, Il-yong became furious. He angrily questioned whether they should take action against the doctor for causing such concern. Jawan thought to himself that there was no way Yoonha, who worked part-time, could have such a large amount of money. He remembered how frightened she had been when they first encountered each other, pleading for no violence. This made him feel disappointed as he wondered if that was how she perceived him. He reflected on her small stature and how she could hit someone without hesitation. Considering how scared she might be if he directly handed her the money, he dismissed the idea of leaving 100 million won in front of her door, fearing she would take it to the police station. He pondered over how he could discreetly give her the money without alarming her, thinking carefully about the best approach. Ileong informed Juwon that someone from the Criminal Investigation Office had arrived. Despite Juwon's earlier directive to stop, Ileong argued that they needed to proceed to uncover who was behind the attempted attack on him. He emphasized that since someone from the Criminal Investigation Agency was already present, it was an opportunity they shouldn't miss. After a brief moment of contemplation, Juwon agreed and instructed Ileong to allow the person from the Criminal Investigation Office to come in. The Criminal Investigations agent, visibly nervous, provided detailed information to Juwon about Go Eunha. According to the agent, she was 27 years old and had graduated from the Department of Mathematics at Korea Women's University. She furthered her education by earning a master's degree from graduate school. Her family was affluent, with parents possessing assets of approximately 10 billion won. Her mother was a university professor and her father, a former judge, now worked as a lawyer. Her siblings were also accomplished, an older sister who was a doctor and an older brother who served as a prosecutor. Notably, Go Eunha was the only one in her family to graduate from Korea Women's University, while all her other relatives graduated from Korea University, a prestigious institution in South Korea. Upon hearing the detailed background of Go Eunha, the members of Juwon's gang whispered among themselves, noting the prestigious features of her family. They expressed disbelief that someone from such an elite background could be involved in criminal activities. The agent continued to provide information explaining that despite her affluent upbringing, Go Eunha had conflicts with her parents after becoming a kid's creator and was no longer receiving financial support from them. Juwon pondered aloud, wondering why Eunha, who came from a wealthy family background, would take on a part-time cleaning job in a building. It became clear to him that this decision was likely driven by the conflict with her parents. The agent relayed further details to Juwon, mentioning that Go Eunha had been urgently seeking funds recently, exploring options including banking and private loans, although she hadn't borrowed any money yet. The agent admitted not knowing the exact reason for her financial strain. Upon hearing this, Juwon realized that the amount Go Eunha needed was indeed 100 million won, confirming his suspicions. The agent flinched under his gaze as Juwon absorbed the information. Then the agent mentioned that Go Eunha was scheduled to attend a charity auction that afternoon to support children with cancer. Upon hearing this, Juwon swiftly formulated a plan. He instructed Ileong to immediately bring 100 million won in cash, intending to provide it to Eunha at the auction. Eunha, feeling despondent, headed to work, lamenting her financial situation. She thought about how unlikely it was for anyone to lend her 100 million won when her monthly salary was only 700,000 won. The situation with Seo-hyun's treatment weighed heavily on her mind, and she calculated the exorbitant amount she would need to repay if she took a private loan with a monthly interest rate of 12%. Realizing that even with multiple part-time jobs, she would never be able to repay the loan, she laughed bitterly at her predicament. However, she became determined, thinking that if their company had as many young YouTubers as the Play with Yina channel, which had gained 1 million subscribers in just 2 years, she could potentially earn enough for Seo-hyun's treatment. She knew that convincing Yina, the popular kids creator and granddaughter of a large corporation's chairman, to help would be key. Despite the director's failure to persuade her, Eunha resolved not to give up. At Yina's studio, Eunha met with Yina, expressing her gratitude for her hard work. Yina, noticing Eunha, questioned her presence. Eunha explained that she had heard from the manager about Yena's refusal to attend the charity auction and inquired if she could reconsider. Yina, however, responded firmly, questioning why she should participate in an event meant to support her sister's fans. Eunha was taken aback by Yena's response. Yena further elaborated that she only participated in events when she received sponsorships for expensive toys, unlike the clay dolls and similar items. Eunha nervously pondered how to handle her friends who couldn't afford expensive toys. Gathering her resolve, she attempted to persuade Yina, acknowledging her point but emphasizing the importance of helping the kids. She implored Yina, a popular young YouTuber, to attend the auction and offered to do her a favor in return. Yina, considering the offer, smirked and disparaged Eunha by reminding her of her part-time job as a cleaner. She then proposed that Eunha clean her house, which was in disarray due to her busy schedule, and even offered to pay her a daily wage. Eunha, initially taken aback, didn't fully grasp Yina's intentions but eagerly agreed, excited by the prospect of helping Seo-hyun and earning money. She enthusiastically accepted the task, expressing her gratitude and holding Yina's hand, praising her generosity and wishing her blessings. Yina, surprised by Eunha's reaction, thanked her and asked her to take care of the cleaning. At the auction, Yena's toys were a huge hit, with people eagerly bidding to buy them. The auctioneer announced that Yena's toys were sold out and it was time to auction off Minnie's toys from the Minnie and Friends channel. Yuna felt a surge of hope, thinking that her subscribers must have seen her videos and would appreciate the toys she brought. She believed that while her toys might not be as popular as Yuna's, it would still attract interest. However, when the auctioneer saw Yuna's clay toy, he was incredulous. He questioned whether it was serious to auction off a clay doll and expressed disbelief. Yuna was shocked and anxious, wondering if her toy was really that humble. The auctioneer suggested starting the bid at 101, unsure of how else to proceed. Seeing the disinterest, Yuna stepped forward and took Yuna's clay toy in her hands, trying to draw attention. She asked everyone to focus for a moment and introduced the clay figure as Admiral Yi Sun-sin, highlighting the cool armor and sword. However, despite Yuna's effort, the crowd remained unimpressed and uninterested. Yuna tried to start the bidding at 10,000 won, but nobody showed any enthusiasm. The crowd made disparaging comments, questioning the value of auctioning a clay doll and expressing their unwillingness to buy it. Yuna, hearing the negative remarks, felt a wave of sadness wash over her. As Juwon and Ilyong entered the auction, the room fell silent. Juwon confidently announced that he would buy the clay figure for 100 million won. The crowd was stunned, unable to believe that someone would pay such an exorbitant amount for a humble toy. Yuna, recognizing Juwon, felt a surge of worry. She remembered him as the gang boss from before, and the sight of him approaching made her anxious. The tension in the room grew as everyone recognized Juwon and Ilyong, becoming visibly nervous. Ilyong addressed the auctioneer, asking if the statue of Admiral Yi Sun-sin was the one being auctioned. The auctioneer, anxious and unsure, confirmed it. Ilyong, frustrated by the situation, expressed his irritation, but then firmly declared that they would buy it, leaving no room for doubt. The auctioneer, still in shock, quickly agreed. The auctioneer, still processing the shock, stammered that the starting price was 10,000 won. Juwon, without breaking his gaze from Yuna, firmly corrected him, stating he would buy it for 100 million won. The auctioneer, stunned and incredulous, confirmed the sale, declaring Juwon the winner at 100 million won. Yuna, overwhelmed and confused by the turn of events, nervously approached Juwon and Ilyong as they prepared to leave with the toy. She asked them why they would spend such an enormous amount on her clay figure. Juwon responded coolly, questioning if he was not allowed to participate in charity auctions. Yuna tried to explain her concern, pointing out that it was a significant amount of money. Juwon reassured her that she needn't worry about it. Still baffled, Yuna murmured, wondering who would buy a clay doll for 100 million won. Juwon paused for a moment, then made his request. He asked Yuna to meet with him and play 3 times, insisting it was all he needed. Yuna, still perplexed by the entire situation, couldn't grasp his intention. She repeated his words, asking in disbelief if he really wanted her to play with him. Later that night, Yuna and Gumiho were at a club, drinking together. Gumiho, surprised and intrigued, asked if Yuna had really received 100 million won from the gangster. Yuna confirmed, explaining that he had given it to her in cash. Gumiho inquired about the money, and Yuna replied that she had given it to Seohyun, who left for Japan the previous night to receive treatment. Gumiho, teasing, remarked that since Yuna had earned the money by sacrificing herself to the gang boss, it should work out well. Yuna suddenly felt anxious and confided in Gumiho, wondering what the gangster really wanted from her. She repeated his request to meet 3 times and play with him, expressing her confusion and anxiety about what he might mean by "play with me." Trembling, she speculated about his intentions, fearing the worst. Gumiho, with a mischievous glint, suggested that maybe playing involved something sinister like drugs or a gruesome game of rearranging body organs. This frightened Yuna, who told Gumiho not to joke around as she was already feeling anxious. Gumiho, seeing Yuna's fear, tried to reassure her by suggesting that maybe the gangster was just a fan and that she should think of him as a big kid with a big body. However, Yuna remained nervous and asked Gumiho to report to the police if anything happened to her. She expressed her concern about safely returning home the next day. Meanwhile, Juwon arrived home and his gang members bowed down to greet him. He handed the box containing the clay toy to one of the men, instructing him to place it carefully on the living room shelf, and emphasized its worth of 100 million won. The man, curious about the high value, opened the box carefully and was shocked to see the clay toy inside. The rest of the gang gathered around, equally stunned and unable to comprehend why Juwon spent such an enormous amount on a simple clay doll. They began to worry about Juwon's mental state, whispering among themselves that something must be seriously wrong with him and questioning whether they should forcibly admit him to the hospital. Suddenly, Ilyong scolded the men, reminding them of their loyalty and respect for Juwon. The man who had opened the box tried to defend himself, but Ilyong cut him off, emphasizing the kind of person Juwon was. He recounted how, after the Bulldog faction had taken control of the Southwest gangsters through Juwon's combat prowess, Juwon's father had handed over the organization to him. On that day, Jiwon had disbanded the Bulldog faction, urging only those willing to wash their hands of the criminal life to follow him, promising them a stable life. Jiwon had immediately established a meat processing company called Thirsty Deer, showing such decisiveness that he became a legend in the gangster world. Ileon's words reminded everyone of Jiwon's leadership and the opportunity he had given them to live respectable lives. The members, realizing their error, agreed, acknowledging Jiwon as their savior who had allowed them to live like humans. A man expressed his disbelief, questioning why Jiwon would spend 100 million won on a clay doll unless he had lost his mind. Ileon explained that the doll was made by the janitor disguised as a killer. The man remained perplexed, asking why Jiwon would spend so much on it. Frustrated, Ileon scolded them for not thinking critically. He speculated that Jiwon might be trying to recruit the woman, considering her potential value to their group. Ileon emphasized that instead of disposing of her, it would be more advantageous to have her join them, highlighting her brilliance and potential usefulness. The members, impressed by Ileon's insight, praised him for his understanding. Mingyu, the youngest among the 12 members, voiced his concern, noting that Jiwon seemed a bit strange lately. When asked why, Mingyu explained that he had seen Jiwon taking out all of his clothes from his closet and staring at them, trying them on and off repeatedly in front of the mirror. The others dismissed Mingyu's worry, pointing out that they all wore the same suit and saw nothing unusual about it. Frustrated, someone yelled at Mingyu, who then backed down, realizing it might not be a big deal. Meanwhile, Jiwon was lost in thought, wondering if Yoonho would remember him after their 3 meetings. Young Yoona, sobbing, urged young Jiwon to play with her, calling out Appa Jibal tilde. Jiwon, aware that the teacher would come soon, tried to reason with her, saying they could play after class. But Yoona, sniffling, pleaded for just a moment more, insisting on playing a little bit longer. Jiwon couldn't deny her and agreed to play for 10 minutes. They started building a sand home together, with Jiwon asking if she was going to make a window too. Yoona confirmed and requested him to make one in a specific spot, explaining that it was a room where a beautiful princess lived. Jiwon laughed, teasing her by asking if it was like the beautiful Princess Yoonha. Blushing, Yoona thought about it and considered that if there was a prince, he would be someone like Hyun-woo, who played with her and played the piano well. She thought to herself that when she grew up, she wanted to marry Hyun-woo. Yoona woke up suddenly, startled by the dream where someone had destroyed the sand home she and young Jiwon had built together. In the dream, that person had called out to her, causing her fear. As she caught her breath, Yoona huffed in frustration, trying to make sense of the dream. She wondered aloud why Hyun-woo appeared in her dream after such a long time, and why the gangster boss had also made an appearance. She couldn't help but connect it to the events from the auction of that company yesterday. Curious, Yoona checked her phone and noticed a notification mentioning Thirsty Deer. She quickly searched for information about it, finding out that it was a large company with over 500 employees. The company had hired reformed criminals to improve its image as a social enterprise. However, despite its official description as a meat processing company, Yoona couldn't shake off the suspicion that it might be connected to the gangster world in some way. Yoona stood in front of her wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. As she sifted through her clothes, she couldn't help but feel anxious. Gumio's words echoed in her mind. What if the boss started to have feelings for her? What if he said something like, "You're the first one to break my ribs"? The thought sent a chill down even his spine. She quickly shook her head, dismissing the idea with fear. Never, she thought to herself, that should never happen. After some time, Yoona dressed herself up intentionally in a way she believed would not be attractive to Jiwon, hoping he would dislike her appearance. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she thought her outfit was quite plain and unappealing. Trembling with fear, she scolded herself for not even trying to look good for the gangster boss. When Jiwon arrived, he was dressed handsomely and attractively, drawing admiration from those around them. Yoona couldn't help but notice how impressive he looked despite the early September heat. Feeling nervous, Yoona greeted him awkwardly when he approached her. "Hello, I'm Go Yoona. Nice to meet you for the first time," she managed to say. Jiwon introduced himself as Seo Ja-won, and then an awkward silence fell between them. Yoona felt the tension and wondered why there was such silence. She felt the urge to say something to break the awkwardness. After breaking the silence, Yoonha apologized, acknowledging that she had been rude last time they met. Jiwon, feeling embarrassed, avoided making eye contact and reassured her that his injury wasn't serious, so she needn't worry about it. Yoonha noticed his discomfort and wondered why he was avoiding eye contact. She then expressed her gratitude to him for helping Seo-hyun receive good treatment. Jiwon replied that he was glad he could assist. Trying to ease the tension, Jiwon asked if she had had lunch yet. Yoona, feeling extremely nervous and on the verge of fainting, internally struggled with her anxiety. Externally, she replied that she liked all kinds of food. Jiwon then began walking and suggested taking her to a place he knew. As Yuna followed Jawan, she couldn't help but notice people staring at her in her less than attractive outfit. Suddenly, she spotted a frog headband and thought about how perfect it would be for making a frog egg video. While lost in these thoughts, she realized Juwon was walking ahead without her noticing and hurried to catch up. In her haste, she accidentally bumped into him. She then noticed Juwon looking at a spot where a woman had just been, prompting her to wonder if he was interested in that woman. Jowon's disappointed reaction made Yuna anxious, and she nervously asked him what he didn't like. Jowon politely asked Yuna for a moment of her time, requesting her to wait for him for 5 minutes. Yuna, feeling flustered, agreed to wait while he stepped towards the building where the woman had entered. Observing this, Yuna made assumptions, recalling recent news about Gangster allegedly selling a woman to a bar. She wondered what they should do if this turned out to be the case and decided to follow the woman into the building. Inside, she discovered it was a women-only loan business. Yuna had observed as Juwon held a paper that appeared to be a loan agreement, noting the ominous warning about consequences for non-payment. Juwon commented to himself that they conducted business in this manner. The woman approached him and asked for her loan agreement back. Nearby, a frightened receptionist made a call, reporting a person with facial scars and requesting urgent assistance from the manager. Juwon tore up the loan agreement, prompting the woman to react in shock and anger, demanding to know who he thought he was speaking to in such a manner. Juwon asked the woman about the reason behind borrowing money, curious about what compelling story led her to take out a loan. She explained that she wanted to go on a trip with her friends. Juwon advised her sternly to return home quickly, considering herself fortunate and to avoid dealing with loan sharks in the future. Angered by his interference, she confronted him, questioning why he was meddling in her affairs and pointing out that someone owed her 3 million won for her travel expenses, challenging him to lend her the money instead. Juwon shouted at the woman, showing her the calculations. If she borrowed 3 million won with a 12% weekly interest rate compounded, he explained how quickly the debt would escalate. Meanwhile, Yoon had examined the torn-up paper and noticed it stated a 12% interest rate repayable after 90 days per share. Juwon continued to emphasize the growing debt with compound interest, leaving the woman shocked and speechless. Yuna added that the amount would reach 4,725,558 won after 1 month, 7,427,890 won after 2 months, and 11,687,928 won after 6 months if early repayment wasn't made, totaling nearly 12 million won. The woman was incredulous at the realization. Yuna explained to the woman the staggering amount she would owe due to compound interest, projecting it to be over 57 million won in 6 months, and an astronomical 1,807,500,773,041 won in a year. Hearing this, the woman became visibly scared and started trembling, admitting she didn't realize the severity of borrowing from loan sharks, and had only planned to repay it through part-time work after a trip. Yuna advised her to always calculate compound interest before signing any contract and urged her to be cautious in the future. Feeling relieved and eager to move on, Yuna turned to Juwon and suggested they go eat. Juwon agreed and they headed off together. As they were about to leave the building, 3 intimidating individuals barged in wielding bats. One of them addressed Juwon directly, questioning his presence in their business. Yuna, visibly frightened by their appearance, saw them as another group of gangsters. However, Juwon remained composed and calmly positioned himself between Yunha and the goons. He casually replied that he had stopped by and intended to enjoy a cup of coffee. The goon questioned why he was interfering in their affairs, to which Juwon responded by adjusting his tie, a subtle gesture signaling readiness for whatever might transpire. The goons were taken aback by Juwon's confident demeanor and response, unsure of how to proceed next. After the goons' companion whispered to their leader about lacking resources, the leader's stern gaze made Yunha nervous. Sensing the tension rising, the companions suggested they leave for the day since they were outnumbered, warning that their boss's patience had limits. Juwon responded with a smirk, directing a message to Goyang Hee to handle his responsibilities properly. This enraged the leader, who charged towards Juwon to strike him, but Juwon swiftly countered with a kick that sent him crashing down. He then calmly asked if anyone else wanted to challenge him, but the others were intimidated into silence. With a sigh, Juwon dismissed them as cowards, unimpressed by their show of force. Juwon then suggested they leave, urging Yuna to move quickly. As they exited the building, Yunha was visibly shaken, and the woman who had been involved earlier expressed concern for her well-being. Despite Yunha insisting she was fine, Juwon noticed her distress and called out to her, reaching out to support her. Yuna found comfort in Juwon's presence and the fresh mint scent he exuded. She leaned against him for a moment, feeling a sense of security, but quickly regained her composure when Juwon asked if she was okay. Feeling embarrassed by her momentary vulnerability, she assured him she was fine, attributing her brief dizziness to the situation. As the woman approached Juwon and apologized sincerely, expressing gratitude and a desire to treat him to a meal, Yuna was taken aback by her sudden change in behavior. She wondered how someone who had been so provocative earlier could now be so deferential. However, Juwon seemed unfazed by the woman's gestures and instead turned to Yuna, asking if she was still feeling unsettled after the earlier confrontation. The woman, shocked and unable to comprehend being ignored by Juwon, stood confused by his apparent disregard. Juwon explained to the woman that his actions weren't a reflection of a movie-like gangster persona, emphasizing that such ideals were unrealistic. Yuna thought his words were well-spoken and acknowledged their truth. Juwon then mentioned that he might need to go to the company due to potential trouble with the men from earlier. He apologized to Yuna for the situation. Yuna reassured him that there was no need for an apology outwardly, but internally she didn't want to have a meal with him in the first place. Juwon left, mentioning he would contact her again, but Yuna felt scared and didn't want him to contact her.